one thing you should notice is that the more holistic the design, the more it takes into account the harmony between the wholes and the parts, the more it sees the interconnections, the more it balances the different levels of causal chains and interactions, the up and down causal change, the sideways, diagonals, and all these, and then it interconnects them in a harmonious way, the more amazing of a device or machine you can create and sustain, like the human body. Some more key points about Holons. So there is coordination and unified action, and it's not just every man for himself. It's not just every part for himself. But in order to get this coordination and unified action, there need to be sacrifices made by the individual Holons. So a part has to sacrifice some part of its autonomy. It can't just do whatever it wants. The little cell right here in my pinky can't just do whatever it wants. It has to follow all the other cells when my brain sends a signal through the nervous system here to move the pinky, left or right, up and down. It has to obey those rules. It also has to sort of obey the laws of physics. It can't just do whatever it wants. It has to follow the laws of physics in order to create this unified thing called a hand, right? Every muscle has to obey. A muscle in my body can't just do whatever it wants whenever it wants. If it did, I would have muscle spasms, and we would call that some kind of disease, and it would inhibit the functioning of my body. You see how this works? Now consider yourself as an ego, as an individual animal human, this chimp that you are. Consider, sort of extrapolate out from this, analogize, and consider what kind of sacrifices do you have to make as an individual in order to fit into the larger holons of which you're a part? Like your family, your religious community or spiritual community, your university, your corporation, your sports team, your city, your country, and the entire human race. See, you can't just go out and do whatever you want. You can't just walk into Walmart and take a shit on the checkout counter. Can't have that. We need to have laws and rules against that. But hopefully, you don't need external enforcement of those laws and rules. You don't need a policeman there policing you on every checkout counter so you don't shit on it. Hopefully, you're wise enough to see that there's something larger going on here aside from yourself. Maybe you feel like taking a shit sometimes just wherever, but you realize, well, I got to sacrifice my desire to take a shit whenever, wherever I want with concern for the larger whole, because there's a sort of order, a higher order that we're trying to establish as a society within that Walmart. We don't want to be walking into a Walmart where people are shitting on the checkout counters. We don't want to do it ourselves, because if everybody started doing it, we wouldn't like that either. If I'm going to the checkout counter, I want to be sure there's no shit smeared on the checkout counter. Now, as obvious as this sounds, I'm not telling you anything new, but the problem is that most people haven't really thought deeply about these very simple, obvious things. Because even though it's simple in this extreme example that I'm giving you might say, well, Leo, nobody would ever do that. Well, you'd be surprised what they do in China. But the reason they don't do that is because we have a culture that has fed our mind with certain ideas that instruct us not to do these things. We will get publicly shamed or ridiculed. We will feel embarrassment, and we learn all these basic things in school. Usually in an elementary school, you start to learn this sort of stuff. Then there's very complicated peer pressure forces acting upon us. And remember, culture itself is a holon, and culture has sub-holons or subcultures within it. See? And there was a separate culture within your family. So your family taught you certain ethics, morals, values, rules, standards, and principles that you just absorbed unconsciously and that you adhere to blindly without ever thinking about it. See, you probably never even asked, is it even a good thing that I'm not allowed to take a shit anytime I want? Maybe that actually hurts my body. Maybe my digestive system isn't working properly because I'm holding my shit in all the time. Maybe, but see, have you thought about that? Because sometimes your culture programs you with ideas and rules that are not so healthy. Now, maybe in this Walmart example, it's a healthy rule. It's good that you're not allowed to take a shit anywhere you want, anytime you want. But maybe there are other things that are dysfunctional. For example, the libertarian political philosophy that's been programmed into you by whatever YouTubers you like to listen to or whatever, or podcasts, talk radio, maybe that ideology is creating dysfunction. Maybe this idea that every American should be able to own an unlimited number of guns, maybe that's not such a good idea for the whole. But you see, if you take the position that I am the most important thing in the world, in the universe, and that there are no Holons above me, and that any other Holon above me is just trying to oppress me, take away my freedom and my liberty, if that's your approach, that's the same approach as one of the cells in my body deciding that it wants to replicate itself and leach all of the other resources in the body. It wants to steal all the calories and take all of the immune cells for itself and replicate itself, damn everything else. And that's called cancer. And the problem with that is that not only does that kill the rest of the body eventually, it also kills that cell which relies on the rest of the body. But that cell only began to do this replication process, in a sense, because it didn't see how it fit into the larger whole, and it refused to sacrifice itself for the larger whole. So sacrificing yourself for the larger whole doesn't mean that you're going to be a slave to the whole. That would also, if it turned into slavery, that would be oppressive and that would be pathological too. So we don't have just two choices here, either absolute freedom in the libertarian sense or slavery and tyranny. There's a delicate medium balance that needs to be exquisitely struck, and it's really difficult to strike that balance well. That's the challenge of government and politics. We've had governments all over the world that were way too oppressive and tyrannical, that were unsustainable and had to be overthrown and led to lots of misery and suffering. And on the other hand, we've also had social organizations that were too lax, too libertarian-like, too loosey-goosey, didn't have enough laws, rules, structures, and that led to all forms of exploitation, evil, enslavement, and so forth. For example, right now in America and in most parts of the world, there's not sufficient regulation over the powers of corporations, and these corporations are basically able to do whatever they want, and they're able to exploit the shit out of a majority of the citizens. They're able to basically practice predatory capitalism and predatory marketing to sell and milk money from the citizenry. And the government isn't really doing much about it because it can't, because it's been co-opted and corrupted by these corporations. And so rather than having tyranny of a king or a monarch, which we don't have in America, that we have tyranny of libertarian anarcho-capitalism, effectively, and plutocracy. So it's all about striking that exquisite balance.